Today we are in the brand new offices of Rauw CC in Rotterdam and very happy to welcome Björn Veenstra, CEO of Company Match, to talk about the great resignation. Is it the great opportunity? Very happy to welcome Björn Veenstra, CEO of Company Match. And the first question I have for you is the great resignation. First of all, what is the great resignation? Because the people are talking about it. And most of the times today it's related to the US. How do you see this?
Well, thank you for having me in the first place. And the great resignation is a thing that we have seen in the US. Like a lot of people after COVID went away from their current jobs, looking for new opportunities. And the assumption is that people are doing so because they have seen that there are other ways to organize their work. Mm-hmm. Another reason is that they saw that they were able to earn better money in a different job, so moving away from working in restaurants and bars. So that made that a lot of people, millions of people, went looking for a new job in the US. And with regards to Europe, there was this expectation like, hey, are we going to see that happen as well in Europe? Yeah, so far it didn't.
It didn't? Okay.
No.
So you don't feel that there are more people going away, leaving their jobs because of the current situation? Sometimes they also relate it to COVID, obviously. People working at home all the time, having more opportunities to think, to look for other companies. But again, in your opinion, this is not really happening.
In general, I would say no, but there's an exemption because there are particular industries, like working in the restaurants and the bars and the hotels. That is where you've seen a lot of people moving away from their old jobs and looking for new opportunities. And I do think in the US, there's a lot of people working in that industry. Yeah. And during COVID, at least from research in our own platform, what we saw is that people were more likely to stay in their jobs because, it's an uncertain situation. Mm-hmm. As you see with crises all the time, people tend to sit and look, okay, what's going to happen? And as soon as the uncertainty flows away, then people start moving again. However, with the whole new setup of working in a more hybrid form, people also had to get used to that new situation. And that's also why recruiters have a very hard job in searching for talent. Yeah. But people, so far tend to stay where they are.
But how do you see the dynamics then? Because we've seen that as well. So there's, like you say, lots of tension on the labor market. There's lots of companies looking for talent, but still there's not so many people resigning. So is it because the companies need more people? Do they need other skills? Is that what's happening in your eyes?
Yeah, well, in the end, it's a combination of all kinds of factors. And in general, there's a mismatch between the skills employers are looking for towards the current population of employees available. So the whole digitalization of the workforce, that's also a huge challenge.
Okay, so but what we do see is that there's also a big problem in engagement. It's not because people stay that they are really engaged. They can just stay, like you say, because of security. Like, okay, I'm not going to quit now because you don't know, it's a very uncertain period. But is that also something that you see, that there's a problem in engagement or in people working for a company, but eventually they don't find the company match, which is also causing quite a lot of tension on a company?
Yes, I would agree. Especially when you are trying to convince a current employee who is kind of happy where he or she is at the moment, and make them engage with another opportunity. It's hard to engage them towards that potential new opportunity. But in general, I would say when you look at the current workforce, but especially with young professionals, they have a different way of looking at labor. It's important, you need to earn your money, but it's very relevant for them how you can deal with your work in your complete life. That means that it's not only about job fit, but also the company fit comes in. And company fit is very important when you talk about engagement. So I do think that, especially for the younger working generations, it's really relevant to not just talk about the job itself, but okay, what is it that you can provide to the company and what can we provide as a company to you in your working life?
Yeah. The Great Resignation is more like a US thing. It's not really happening in Europe, but we could consider it as the great opportunity, because it's now that as a company you need to really go and dig into your culture and your values, because otherwise you will not be able to attract young people, apparently.
No, exactly. And that's particularly the case for attracting people. But what we see here in Europe at the moment is that the focus is more and more going to retention and also keeping the current employees happy, because it's so hard to get in new talent that you don't even want to lose your current talent for that matter. And
so that's where basically employer branding comes in. We always say before COVID, but employer branding was often something for the bigger companies. But now what we see is that more and more companies are really looking into their employer brands to retain talent and also obviously to attract new talent. And I suppose that it's something that you with Company Match also see.
Yeah, absolutely. And where employer branding was indeed something for the bigger companies to spend money on, but also to really have like employees engaged to that topic within the company, because employer branding is not only about like attracting people or making your brand look good for potential talent. Employer branding mainly is based on the perspective of the inside out. So whereas your current employees are your employer brand. It doesn't make sense to make anything up from a marketing perspective from the outside. It's really like your employees are the DNA of your employer brand.
So employer brand is not only top down, employer brand is also bottom up.
I think it's bottom up. And that's what I mean with like the inside out perspective. Yes. And employer branding is indeed really growing up, where it was more for bigger companies. Also, the smaller companies have come to realize that their company culture is something unique. And it may not sometimes be super sexy or whatsoever, but it really makes you who you are as a company. And that is something that differentiates yourself from your colleagues in the market. And if you are able to use that in a proper way, that really is something where you can distinguish yourself towards the competition for talent.
And how difficult is it? Because that's a question I often get from companies. Employer brand, again, is a really nice, it's a nice definition of this is my company and these are my values, but how do you start with it? What department starts with it? You say it's bottom up, so you start with your people, but how do you have a process? Do you have some tips that you can share?
Yeah, well, actually, it's really simple. And it starts all with, like, ask your employees. What do they value? What do they care for? And then you probably will find out pretty quickly 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 points that you can distinguish yourself on. What we do, for that matter, is that it all starts with conducting an ambassador survey within the group of colleagues, but also within the departments or the geographic locations, and ask them, like, hey, what do you value in work? What do you value in our culture? What are concerning to you as a person the values that we care for as a company?
And do you have to do the same with C-level, with CEO, with management? Because I suppose that it's throughout the company.
No, absolutely. They're part of that, but they count likewise. So it's not that their voice is
more valued
important.
than.
No.
And how important is mental health in all of this?
Oh wow, yeah. Well, well-being is a really hot topic, and I think even in Belgium, on the Bisschop
Yes.
is really promoting that as well. And I think it's part of taking care of your employees.
It's a really big opportunity. It's almost a must for a company to start thinking about your employer brand, questioning everybody who is in your company, whether it's C-level, whether it's people at the floor, and defining your specific culture, and from there working towards more engagement and attracting new people. Does it also mean that there's a new leadership that you need to find, or are there new leaders popping up? Because I can also imagine that this changes the whole way a company is managed.
No, absolutely. I also foresee that with the fact that we are working more and more from a hybrid perspective, that is absolutely challenging leadership. Whereas leadership in the first place is one of the main keys in having success as a team or as a company, because people leave the company because of their manager, not the other way around. Yeah. So that has always been a very important thing. We were already working quite remotely, almost fully remote right now. And that challenges me as a leader. How do we take care of our culture, but also like really simple things, taking care for each other when somebody is having a birthday. Yeah, so definitely you need different leaders to show the way to the future in working with remote teams.
That's something that we see, and it's true even for a small company as ours, seeing the fact that everybody's working partly remote. Before you could have some culture like here, which is very nice. There's so many nice design, and this part could be part of your culture. At least you when you come here, you feel that there's an atmosphere and there's nice things to. There's the coffee corner. All this disappears, so it has to be much more visible, I suppose. That's the first thing. Your culture and your values, they need to be much more visible, because it's so much more difficult when working remote. For most of the companies, this must be really the turnaround into new leadership types. Is this also for you an opportunity to start working on not only your cultures, but also on corporate social responsibility?
Absolutely, and especially when you look to the new working generations, they really ask themselves, like, to whom do I put my talents to? Am I going to work at your place? Is he or she going to work at my place? And especially if you can be like an accountant at your office or at my office, so at which company you want to put your talent for let's say the next 3 to 5 years. And then you can really make a difference as a company, especially from the perspective of this new working generation. They really care about what are the values of the company and how do you execute on them. And how does that relate to my daily work? And how can I contribute to that goal? So yes, I really think that those topics are, if you have content around those topics, if you can engage on that, if you are able to make it tangible for potential talent, that really makes it like a conversation starter for future talent.
Yeah. One of the questions I often get is all this opportunity and employer branding, is that something that any company can start? Because lots of people, they are doubting whether they could start with it. Because, you often, again, we see this happening in the big companies with an employer branding manager, but in most of the companies, there's nobody managing the process yet. So how do you start with the process? Like who starts with it in a company?
There'll always be one person who takes the initiative, of course. But I truly think that the C-level should be involved. They should be enthusiastic about it. Give everyone within the organization the floor to get started with it. So it should not be just a project that is being executed on marketing or communications or HR or recruitment. So it's really a collaborative initiative. And then when it comes to employer branding is nothing more and nothing less than telling stories.
Mm-hmm.
And sharing your story of your company, which can be a small story or a big story. But we all know that small stories usually have the most impact.
Yep.
So yeah, I would say employer branding is much like finding the right story.
So basically, every company should look for their unique right story in order to survive in the future. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, I cannot disagree with that. Yeah,
that's what we see as well.
Yeah.
Before there were companies and they did a certain thing and they could do it for 50 years because the world wasn't changing so quickly. Now we see that there are so many things changing. There are so many digital changes. We are not living in times anymore where you go and work for a bank, you had a certain job, and 50 years later you still had the same job.
No, absolutely. And we also need to realize that our current employees within our own companies, recruiters are reaching out to them as well, almost on a daily basis. And that makes you think like, okay, what is it that we have, what we care for, but also what is it that we're heading towards into the future, to make it challenging enough to stay and develop yourself as a person within the company.
So the learning aspect, continuous learning, is something which is very important is basically part of your employer brand. Because if you don't do that, probably at a certain moment people will quit your company because they want to do something else.
Yeah, it's really giving them the freedom to develop them. And as soon as people start to feel like, okay, I'm circling around in the same activities, I think that if you're able to offer the opportunity to keep developing yourself, that's one of the main reasons why people stay.
Yeah. And I like what you say because we work with so many companies and every company has a story. It could be a small story, it could be, some have a very exciting story, some have a less exciting story, but you still have a story. You have a history, you have a story, you have people, and probably you have a product and values, and this should make you unique. And this is something that strikes me quite a lot, is that we do get these questions like, can you please help us creating the story, which is great, but it's a bit strange because without a story, there's no company. So the story is always there. It's just how do you make this story into something that lives?
Yeah, I'm truly convinced that we can help companies to identify the stories within the company, and then with the knowledge, like a company as yours, to make sure that the story is being told and being seen, so that people can interact on it and engage with that story. Yeah.
And just as a last question, do you feel that there's much more attention now when some people come back to the office, and that there's this stress on hiring people, that there's much more interest in employer brands, like compared to a couple of years ago, or compared to before COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge need of how do we keep our talent in, and how can we attract potential new talent to the company. And everybody is looking for new ways to engage with future talent. And on the one hand, these new working generations, they have a different view on labor. So you see that employers are adjusting to that, and that pretty much relates to engaging and with the story of the company and make your values tangible. Because just the post and pray, so sending out a job ad via whatever, Instagram, TikTok,
I like post and pray.
LinkedIn. Yeah, that's not something where talent is pretty much impressed from, it's not a conversation starter. No. And I think that's a good combination of finding your story, telling your story, and engage on the story.
And using your co-workers to tell the story.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's where it starts. Yeah.
Okay. I would like to thank you, Bjorn, for being here and sitting on this sofa.
Yeah, great sofa.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much as well.
Bye-bye.